Welcome to Economic Divide with me, Kavatahwai. And on yet another ED exclusive, we have been contacted by a group of activists in Uganda who have raised awareness with us about the destruction of the Bugoma Forest Reserve. The story sees focus turn to the Hoima region in Uganda, where work has begun to clear 900 hectares of forest reserve, land that is protected and has since been leased to the Hoima Sugar Company, who have started removing forests to make way for sugarcane. One of the key problems is the heavy deforestation taking place in Uganda. In fact, forests have shrunk from 24% of the total land area in the year 1990 to just 9% in 2015, which has now become ever lower in the last 6 years, bringing us up to date with today. On top of the land being lost, the human and environmental impact is also having a devastating effect, with over 41,000 hectares of the reserve containing 23 species of animals, including 550 endangered chimpanzees, 225 species of birds, and 260 varieties of trees. Let's get straight into our first report, which looks at the destruction of the Bugoma forest in more detail and find out just who is exploiting the land for profit, as well as introducing you to the chairperson of the activist group, who will be joining us in the studio via video link.
In 1932, the Bugoma forest in Uganda was declared as an undemarcated forest reserve, which in theory meant that the land in the west of Uganda should have been protected and maintained by the relevant authorities. However, with various rules and regulations surrounding the independence of Uganda from colonial control, as well as the centralisation of the country away from local kingdoms and territories, things took a turn for the Bugoma forest when the Hoima Sugar Company took control of large portions of the forest, making way for sugarcane plantations in place of trees. The forest, being home to a wide range of flora, fauna and wildlife, is now at risk from deforestation, with illegal logging taking place. Aside from the Hoima Sugar Company exploiting the land for sugarcane, there's also large-scale tea and tobacco farms on the outskirts of the forest, all threatening to widen and expand their endeavours, potentially breaking into protected forest land. In November 2020, the Uganda Environment Authority gave the go-ahead for the clearing of large sections of the forest to sugarcane companies, with the agency claiming that the land given to the clearing companies had been given in error, believing that the land actually fell outside the certified reserve boundaries. A local kingdom, named the Bunyoyo Kitara Kingdom, claimed 14,100 acres of the forest as ancestral land, and just a few days later leased the land to the Hoima Sugar Co. Thousands of people have since been displaced and evicted from lands, making way for sugarcane plantations and processing facilities in the process, destroying lives, the environment, and of course the protected animals of the forest. In spite of various legal cases against the plantations, clashes between the Hoima Sugar Company and various agencies are still ongoing, hence why the Association for the Conservation of the Bugoma Forest has formed and have directed their campaigns at saving the forest. The chairperson of the campaign, Constantino Tesarin, joins us now on this exclusive episode of Economic Divide.
Joining me in the studio for this exclusive story from Kampala in Uganda is the chairperson of the Association for the Conservation of Bugoma Forest, Constantino Tesarin. Constantino, welcome to Economic Divide, and thanks for raising this important topic with us. Now, someone who is actively involved in the protection of this important forest, can you give our viewers a background into the story and let us know what is being done to stop this destruction?
Thank you for hosting me today. Bugoma Forest is a tropical forest, is a protected reserve, gazetted from 1932. The background history is that in the recent years, from 2016, there has been a sudden attempt by various stakeholders, particularly Bunyoro Kitara Kingdom, which is a local institution in the area, and sugarcane investors, to suddenly claim part of the ownership of the reserve, totally more than 8,000 hectares out of the 400 that it is of the reserve, creating land titles, and so basically changing the the possibility of the existence itself of the ecosystem.
Well, can you explain the importance of this land? I mean, why is the forest so vital for the people and wildlife of that area? And why did the authorities then go ahead and allow the destruction?
Yes, the Bugoma Central Forest Reserve is actually a very important forest, not only for the size, but because it is a Rift Albertine Valley graben forest. Therefore, it is rated among the top for biodiversity importance in Uganda. It is a water catchment for the whole area of Lake Albert. It is a chimpanzee sanctuary hosting about 500 chimpanzees out of a population in Uganda of 5,000. It is also a potential for ecotourism, considering the presence of other endemic monkeys, like the endemic typical Ugandan mangabis. It is central for the climate stabilization of a regional agriculture, specifically tea crops and other maize and food crops, and even beekeeping, which definitely have depended and they will depend on the ecosystem of Bugoma forest.
Now, the Water Environment Minister, Sam Cheptoris, has accepted responsibility for failing to stop this illegal encroachment on the Bugoma Central Forest Reserve. Does this recognition of the blame come as too little too late for the forest, and what can be done to reverse the damage in the process?
Himself, we can say, is a scapegoat, is like the person to be blamed over not having been in control of decisions that have decided the fate of a forest, simply because it's not on him, and simply because he knows very well that it is the government itself, through his apparatus, like the resident district commissioner, which is the person on the ground of the district representing government project. It is the political party of a president, head of a state, interested in developing sugar and also in dealing with timber. And it is a number of generals and military from the Uganda army that are currently fetching timber worth $65,000 per hectare without us to know why they are there.
And finally, Constantino, for all of the viewers out there who want to find out more about the Bugoma Forest and the work that you are doing this valuable work, where can they go to get the information that they need?
We have a blog titled with our association name, Association for the Conservation of Bugoma Forest, the same as the Facebook page, and also Save Bugoma Forest campaign, which is our initiative, which we do together with other organizations, about 20 organizations in Uganda, as a Facebook page, Save Bugoma Forest. And especially, we appeal to help on the new funding opportunity that it is the GoFundMe Save Bugoma Forest.
Okay, many thanks to Constantino Tessarin, the chairperson of the Association for the Conservation of Bugoma Forest. We all wish you well in your campaign to save the forest.
Thank you once again for having hosted me, and we hope for the better. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Okay, don't forget, just like Constantino, you too can get in touch with us here on Economic Divide and share your stories. Why not drop us a line? We promise to get back to all of you. Now to our next report. As Uganda emerges from recent elections, let's take a look into how the nation is coping with post-colonialism and what the current economic situation is in Uganda.
Uganda in eastern Central Africa gained its independence from the UK on the 9th of October 1962, becoming a republic at the time, yet maintaining its position within the Commonwealth of Nations. The post-independence years were dominated by ties between the newly formed government and the largest of Uganda's regional kingdoms, the Buganda. It was, however, on January the 25th, 1971, that Uganda rose to international attention when a military coup saw then-President Obote replaced by Army General Idi Amin, the man who laid claim to being the conqueror of the British Empire. Amin's rule over Uganda saw him not only remove any association with the British Empire, but also saw him remove thousands of Indian minority workers and entrepreneurs from the country. Amin claimed that the Indian minorities were the responsibility of the British and accused them of sabotaging Uganda's economy and encouraging corruption. The expulsion also included people from Pakistan and Bangladesh. Amin's reign ended in 1979 after the Uganda-Tanzania War, following the invasion of Uganda by Tanzanian forces. Amin later died in exile in Saudi Arabia following an illness. Following Amin's death, Uganda's economy picked up in the 1980s.
After the Idi Amin period, Uganda experienced massive economic growth, particularly from the late 1980s onwards. So in 1986, Yoweri Museveni, who's still the president in Uganda, he came to power at the end of a civil war. And the economic strategy that he put in place was incredibly effective. And one of the things that really helped Museveni's government was big support from the international community.
However, things have been harder over the past few years, in part due to a series of ongoing conflicts in the north of Uganda, which have sowed seeds of doubt for foreign investors. But there is hope within Uganda that things will pick up again in the future, especially in the field of tourism. Recent presidential elections have also added another layer to the economic uncertainty, with the incumbent president, Yoweri Museveni, winning an election by 55.3% to 35% to former singer Bobi Wine, who has accused the Museveni government of winning with fraudulent results, hence seeing his continuous rule since 1986. This has once again caused foreign investors to ride with an air of caution when it comes to investing in Uganda, but is something that may just blow over with time as Museveni continues regardless.
What we've seen around the Ugandan elections this year is really a repeat of what's happened around the last 2 or 3 presidential elections in Uganda. A large amount of violence, a huge amount of instability, and of course that has an economic impact. Investors get very jittery, tourists stop coming to the country. With the previous elections, that instability has tended to be quite short-lived. It's one of the remarkable things about Museveni's government is that they've been able to quash their opposition, deal with elections, and then move on almost as though nothing had happened.
Joining me in the studio is current affairs and impact analyst Mahan Abedin and Godfrey Asimwe, Professor of Development Studies from Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda. Mahan, welcome. Let me first go over to the professor again.
Sure.
Professor, thanks for joining us. First up, recent elections in Uganda, they have sparked calls by opposition candidate Bobi Wine to nullify the results. Aside from the obvious political fallout that this may have caused, how will it hinder, do you think, Uganda's economic prospects, in particular, as like the rest of the world, Uganda has been hit with obviously the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's a very, very pertinent question. Uganda, of course, is in the middle of the pandemic, which has crippled the economy, but it's picking up. And amidst the crisis, then we got elections, which took quite a lot of funding. But then the aftermath of the election, which has brought some tensions, has led to some hiccups. But I don't think it will really adversely affect the economic supplies, production. It will not have really a very, very strong impact on the economy.
Okay, well, Mahan, Uganda has gone through a lot. I'm sure you're aware of that over the last few decades. What stands out is the liberation from British colonial rule to the government of Idi Amin, who coined that term, conqueror of the British Empire. Now, how do you think that Uganda, just like other African nations, actually have emerged from this colonialism, and whether they can truly able to thrive as independent nations?
Well, rather good, actually, as far as Uganda is concerned. I mean, first of all, Uganda actually is scoring relatively high economic growth rates. In 2019, their economy grew by 6.9%, if I'm not mistaken. And I suspect a similar growth rate will be recorded for 2020. So economically, they're doing well. At the political level, things are a little bit more complicated. Let's not forget there was an insurgency in northern Uganda led by a very strange group called the Lord's Resistance Army, which some people said were funded by the Israelis. And that conflict is still smoldering, albeit at a very low level.
Okay, thank you for that. That's Mohan Abedin and Professor Asimwe. We will be hearing back from them later in the show. Time now to take a break here on Economic Divide. But don't go anywhere, as we have plenty more coming up after this short message.
February 11, 1979 is known as one of the unique moments in human history. The victory of Islamic Revolution in Iran not only overthrew the regime of one cruel monarchy, but also cut off the hand of global imperialism in Iran, spearheaded by the United States of America. The Islamic Revolution and subsequent establishment of the Islamic Republic brought about major changes in regional and international developments. Such strategic influence results from the nature of the Islamic Revolution, which attracts oppressed nations around the world. The revolution has a popular essence and emanates from human nature itself, standing in stark opposition to cruelty, aggression, and dependency. The Islamic Revolution has been like a small seedling which has gradually morphed into a sturdy tree over the past 42 years and is still growing. Commemorating 42 years of revolution this week on the Mideast Stream.
Welcome back to Economic Divide with me, Kabatahwe. Time now to take a look at other economic headlines hitting the front pages in our Info News section. Our first story takes us to the oil sector, where petroleum giant BP has announced losses of $5.7 billion, which, according to BP, is blamed largely on the impact of the COVID-19 virus on the economy. The company was forced to write off some $6.5 billion last year and cut its global workforce by 10,000 people, what BP has described as a challenging year. Over to the United States, where President Joe Biden has promised to inject a $1.9 trillion package into the American economy, designed to rescue the nation following the disastrous handling of the COVID-19 pandemic by former President Donald Trump. However, GOP members have urged people to be warned about the inflation that will stem from the cash injection, something that will cause further anguish to the American workforce. On to China. China has announced that its three largest electric vehicle manufacturers have announced a 350% surge in growth since January. With many global car makers looking to cut down on their carbon footprints, the increase in demand could see China soon take a much larger slice of the global electric car market, valued at some $162.34 billion. And finally, silver prices have hit an 8-year high as the ongoing trend of Reddit's army of retail investors have pushed up commodity prices. Following the GameStop fiasco, which cost hedge fund investors some $15.3 billion in year-to-date trading, the amateur investors' attention on the precious metal has seen prices rise to above $30 per ounce, seeing a 19% rise due to the trend. Well, time now to take a look at our final report of the day, as we look into how Uganda has interacted with its regional and global partners on an economic front.
Uganda, like many other African nations, relies heavily on its trade with other African nations, rather than a wider economic umbrella with the rest of the world. However, investment by China into the country via the One Belt One Road initiative is a vital part of the growing Ugandan and wider African economy, and in the long run could lead to a positive economic growth rate and refreshed infrastructure in the future. However, current events have caused large hurdles for all. Much like the rest of the world, Uganda was no exception when it came to the impact of the coronavirus, with the country seeing just over 40,000 recorded cases of the virus within its borders. However, so far, just 327 lives have been lost, something that Uganda should be proud of compared to other nations. One of the key policies to keeping the numbers so low is the tough measures taken by the government to keep the 42 million people of Uganda safe. This included tough lockdown measures, closing all schools, banning large gatherings, and closing businesses even before the first cases were recorded. This not only came about as an air of caution against the virus, but also came from necessity, as many of the country's vital medical infrastructures were already weakened and crumbling. And furthermore, Uganda had learned many lessons from the Ebola outbreak that preceded COVID-19. But it is the distribution of the vaccine that Uganda is worried about, rather than the containment of the virus, which of course has hurt its local and regional economy badly. With many richer countries in the world seemingly able to roll out the vaccine quicker than poorer nations, it's left many in Uganda concerned.
Uganda, like most of the countries in this region, has really been worried by the slowness in distributing the vaccine in Africa and other parts of the global south. There's been a lot of anger in Rwanda, in Uganda, in this region as a whole, about the Northern Hemisphere countries hoarding the vaccine. And so there's a lot of anxiety here about when the vaccine will even arrive.
What now remains to be seen is whether Uganda can bounce back from the economic impact of the virus and a downturn in its economy, and once again see the likes of tourism and international trade pick things back up, giving this highly historic nation a strong foothold as the world slowly but surely wakes up from COVID-19.
Back in the studio is Professor Godfrey Asimwe and Mahan Abedin. Okay, Professor, like many nations in Africa, regional and international trade, they are vital parts of the Ugandan economy. How do you think regional pacts have actually helped the country? And have events like, for example, Brexit made it harder for Uganda and other African nations to export goods to the likes of the UK?
Yeah, of course, there are already stringent conditions to getting into those developed markets to export, because we are largely importing, but then the export aspect of it is constrained a lot by protectionism, and hopefully with Brexit there will not be tightening of imports and regulations.
All right. Thank you, Professor Godfrey Asimwe from Makerere University in Kampala. It was great having you with us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, Mahan, already we have discussed the notion of post-colonialism in Africa. Let's turn our attention towards interstate trade in Africa. Yes. How do you think nations are faring when it comes to trading with each other? I mean, do you think that the Chinese investment, for example, into African infrastructure through their One Belt, One Road initiative will boost African economies? Or do you think African nations need to span out further beyond their continental borders?
Well, let's stay with the big picture first, and that Chinese connection is all important because it's got the Americans worried. There was, for instance, the Brookings Institution, this major think tank in the US, they did a program on this in 2019. So, well, Africa is potentially a market of 1 billion people, yeah, and they're potentially very sophisticated consumers, and people should be tapping into that. But the Americans, just like the European colonizers before them, they will fail because they want to engage with Africa at a cultural level too. They have a superiority complex. Whereas the Chinese, they go in, they don't have that package. They don't care about, the politics or the culture. They don't want to change the cultural environment, if you like. And the Chinese have been very successful. But look, addressing your question head on about interstate trade, regrettably, African states, all the statistics prove this, regrettably, they're weak on that because they've got many problems between themselves. And also, the latter part of your question about looking outwards, that's just not happening. I can't think of a single African country that has an active foreign policy beyond the continent.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We do appreciate your comments, Mahan. Always a pleasure having you, Mahan Abedin, here with us, and also Professor Godfrey Asimwe, which we just heard from also. Well, it's time now to visit our regular slot, 1,000 Words. As we have so often covered on Economic Divide, there is a serious notion of land exploitation in Africa, as demonstrated in today's episode, which has seen the Bugoma forest become a victim to just such an example. Yet in spite of facing tough and often powerful opposition, there are pockets of resistance against large corporations who are fighting to give back the land and resources to the people and the wildlife of Africa, and who are raising awareness of just what is happening in the world. For Uganda and the rest of Africa, what now remains to be seen is just how local communities can escape from hardship, learn to develop new skills and education, and finally emerge from the heavy baggage of post-colonialism, free to set up and run their own thriving economies and not having to be dictated to by large international conglomerates, nor for that matter, influential international entities and stares. That's about all the time we have for this episode, so on behalf of myself, Kaveh, and the whole team here on Economic Divide, thanks for watching, stay safe, and we'll see you again.